All right, everybody. Welcome to Hardpoints here in the United States and Canada and around the world, a podcast about energy security and the startup economy and how they intersect to shape the world around you. We unpack the real dynamics behind the headlines, what's changing, what it means, and why it matters to you. Thanks for being here. Neal, we're big in Canada, huh?
we stirred the pot, man.
We stirred the pot.
You want to tell people what you mean?
Yeah, so we just have this little podcast that, is two buddies that like to talk about things and apparently record it and share it. And our most recent one was about how Canada keeps your lights on. So why are we treating them like the enemy? Got a lot of attention. A lot of people were pretty impassioned, we'll say, about certain things. Obviously, we got a couple of facts wrong there. So thanks for our Canadian listeners for correcting us that there's 41 million, not 30-ish million. I guess I could have looked at that. I don't know if it is all that relevant of a detail, other because I'm firmly in the Canadian camp, but I'll work to do better on that. But anyway, so it was kind of fun there. A lot of people had a lot of comments there, big feelings about like how the U.S. has been treating Canada, and very well justified. And I think that came through in our podcast where Neal and I were talking about it. So, anyways, if you're listening to us from Canada, welcome to the party. Share with your friends. Hopefully, we can continue to advocate, where it's appropriate on behalf of our Canadian friends.
Yeah, one of the comments, and I think this will come out in the reader mailbag too, was about how the silence was deafening. I didn't feel that from my end, but that's why it's helpful to get outside perspectives. Like I think there was a feeling from the comments that Americans haven't been speaking out about it, and therefore maybe one of the reasons the episode did so well is because we did. Which, I've been saying it, we've been saying it to each other on this podcast, and I've certainly been saying it in my friend groups, but I think it's a valid point that there hasn't been like a no kings protest on like, dude, those are our friends up there, those family friends, those are the folks we went to war with, we share a continent, the longest border, we've been to hell and back again with them. And there just hasn't been that level of response. So I understand the point, and I think it's valid.
Yeah. Well, so we're now big in Canada. I am literally big in Japan when I'm there. But other than that, no.
You're big everywhere.
I'm just kind of a large person. Anyways, man, how was your weekend?
Good. We had a great Mother's Day. I didn't get a lot of work done because I was just so focused on, making sure the mothers in my life were well taken care of. And, I've got little kids, so they don't do it. So I do it. But how about you?
Yeah, kind of the same. Really wanted to make sure that the mothers in my life were, known that they were loved and appreciated. My mom, so took her out to brunch and had a nice time with her and my sister. My kids came along. My wife was working on Mother's Day, the vagaries of working in the hospital. So the kids and I, turned to, cleaned the house, got her some flowers. And then my daughter wanted to make her, my kids are old enough now that they're starting to be more involved in it rather than, kind of a sideshow, like I'm supporting them rather than the other way around. So my daughter wanted to make paella. She's 10. Yeah, so that was a laborious task. My son, thankfully, was just like brownies from scratch. So that was good. But anyways, it was just a lot of that. Plus, I've been working in the backyard continuously. So sometimes I feel
you're
like
getting stronger, man.
Sometimes I feel like I go to work to relax almost because I get to sit in a chair rather than like manual labor all day. But anyways, it's good.
Yeah. Right on. Well, that's something not often. Well, I will say it this way. I didn't see this part of life, the sandwich generation coming. So I have, it's my grandmother who my grandfather's passed away now, and I want to make sure she feels loved and appreciated. My mom, and then also my wife. And so it's an all-out effort. So I'm with you. I'm like, today I came to the office a little bit disoriented, trying to figure out where my feet were under me. So
yeah, it's it is it is like D-Day for a married man because you're helping your kids, you're taking care of your wife, and then you're also helping your parents. So
yeah, yep. All right, well, let's jump into it. Today, we're going to talk about what we're calling China's green windfall, and that is that the war in Iran has reshaped the energy world. The Strait of Hormuz has been closed for a while. It has, typically sent about 20% of its of the world's oil supply, and that oil shock has rippled through the global economy. It's now, desperate countries scrambling for alternatives, and it just happens that China was sort of pre-positioned for clean energy, clean tech, and to supply the world with that sort of next generation of energy. So when the U.S. Israel coalition launched the strikes, Iran's response wasn't just military; it was economically, and through the closing of the strait. And that, in particular, was impactful in Asian countries, specifically Japan, China, Korea. But the knock-on effects, were dramatic as well. So, Iran struck Qatar's LNG complex on March 18th, which was a 17% reduction in Qatar's LNG. That's liquid natural gas production. That damage is going to take 3 to 5 years to repair. That sent Asian LNG spot prices up about 140%. And, in addition to that, we started to see China stepping into this vacuum where exports of solar tech, battery, electric vehicles reached record highs. And, China exporting about 68 gigawatts of solar technology in that month alone. As, we saw in Thailand, in Korea, in Laos, in India, a bunch of government mandates to curb production. Curb consumption. My fault. Which is a really odd thing. Instead of just watching prices go up, they actually started, the school days went from 5 days a week to 4 days a week. People coming to the office were asked to not consume energy. People who produce things in those places were asked to not produce as much as they were. But simultaneously, they started buying solar panels, and folks started buying electric vehicles. So let me kick it off for you, Mike. I think the picture that China, India, Japan, South Korea, they account for 75% of Gulf oil exports and 59% of the liquid natural gas exports through the strait. How much does this sort of economic second order thinking factor into a decision to go to war in the first place? Like, did we see all of this coming and just sort of accept it? Or did we get surprised by it?
I think the answer is obvious. And I think you know what my answer is. There would be here are the choices. You could do the strategic thing, you could do the tactical thing, or you could do the thing that we did, which is neither. So the strategic thing would have been to, put together your allies, continue to pressure sanctions, see if you can rebuild rebuild some degree of kind of like a nuclear deal potentially. That would be the strategic thing. The tactical thing would be what we did, previously, which was use some of our bunker busting technology in order to, to kind of hold back their nuclear capacity for a little while. Probably encourages them to develop nuclear capacity. And then you could do what we did, which is decide that you want to destroy their entire military, do kind of a half-assed regime change sort of thing, but without any ground forces of your own or without building up the ground forces on the ground itself. And essentially, it's just a massive unforced error on the American side of things, and it's having a lot of consequences kind of all over the globe, including to America's allies, who we're not treating much like allies, reference Canada, but also, in a lot of the developing world, a lot of places where, passing through those straits is a lot of the world's fertilizer supply. U.S. farmers are not going to be farming. Food prices are going to go up in the United States, or they're going to be farming, but they're not going to have as productive a yield, I should say. So food prices are going to go up in the United States. Food elsewhere in the world is just not going to be there at all. And that means people are going to start starving. So there's just like all these awful second order, third order effects attached to it. And the main one is that we are playing right into China's hand strategically. It's just like we screwed this up so fucking massively. It's hard to overstate it.
Yeah. So one stat that popped out of me as I was researching this is new electric vehicle registrations increased by 50% in Europe in March. In just 1 month, this was the first full month of the sort of war-induced shock. So I'm just drawing that back when you say China is um, uh, poised to capitalize on it. I think what you're talking about is those that increased demand of electric vehicles. Many of those vehicles are coming from China.
Yeah, I mean, let's wind the clock back a little bit. So China doesn't have a whole lot of its own natural oil resources. The U.S. does. So China was having to import a fair amount of its energy, coal, natural gas, oil. It has some. I mean, there's no place that really has none. But and so when it looked at that, and then it looked in the fact that like the world was changing from a climate perspective, they came to realize that there was this real strategic advantage for being able to build out infrastructure around renewable energy, batteries, electric vehicles, and it was an explicit goal of their 14th five-year plan, which is just coming to an end right now. And so over the previous 5 years, China, the state government, funded the startup of 100 different electric vehicle companies, 100. And that's just like one example. And so as a result, some of the best ones around the world are these Chinese companies that are really affordable and very approachable. And so historically, the United States maybe could have put a squeeze on China, because like we could have put a squeeze on like their ability to get access to petroleum and oil, but they built up their petroleum reserve, their strategic reserve, to a degree that's way bigger than the United States's, and they've decarbonized their big parts of their industry. They're still don't get me wrong, they still pollute a ton, but they are less dependent on petroleum than practically anywhere else. And they've taken that technology and they're now exporting it everywhere, Europe included. And Europe has long had, long being a relative term here, but long for within the climate space, a requirement for decarbonization around motor vehicles. So they found a willing market, helped to push out like U.S. Automakers that had little toehold in Europe, but it's getting more tenuous as we go. And they're strengthening the bonds of trade with Europe, the developing world. I mean, like we played explicitly into China's hand here. They knew exactly what they were doing. They did it. And we could have decarbonized. We could have moved away from oil, but instead we decided to like absolutely destroy oil markets. It's a mess.
Yeah, it's a mess. I think in the U.S. though, there's an expectation anyway that we're going to be less impacted, right? The oil and LNG global markets. So we're going to see some increase in, gas prices, for example, are up a couple bucks now, which California is insane. I mean, it's high $6, what, a 650, 6 to 80, depending on where you are. But the expectation is because we have this domestic production, we're going to be better off. So, do you expect that to happen? I mean, you mentioned, food prices, because fertilizer is going to go up, food prices are going to go up, inflation is going to go up broadly because energy and food are going up. But are we going to be insulated?
No. I mean, we've talked about it a lot on this podcast about how we're in like a global energy market, right? And so the U.S. is actually, because we are producing so much oil relative to the rest of the world, now that we've kind of choked that off, we are increasing our exports. So prices are going up in the United States because other places in the world need oil and they can pay for it. And so it makes more money to ship it out. I think sometimes people like that are, don't think in kind of systems or strategically. They tend to think of this as like, like the game Civilization, where like, oh, I found oil within my borders, therefore I can do the thing, but like that only really applies like in a wartime footing. And in a wartime footing, like you're talking about nationalizing the oil industry. Nobody's talking about that. So until we talk about nationalizing the oil industry, that means that oil is going to go where the price is best, and that may be offshore. So that's where we're at. That's the reason that oil is up. As of today, according to AAA, the price of a gallon of gasoline across the United States averages $4.52. Um,
And before that, what was it at the start?
I want to let's see.
Two
That's
260 or 280 or something. It's up like $2 from my memory, but
yeah. So I
I
could
think
do
also there was a meeting in I think it was the White House, DC. Anyway, the administration asked a bunch of oil executives to come to DC, and they're like, "Drill, baby, drill." And I wasn't in the meeting. I don't know, but what I gather from that meeting is that they were like, "No, we can't." And the reason, actually, at least in the analysis, and I think this is to be borne out over time, because in some worlds you're like, well, the oil prices are up. Those executives shouldn't want to go out and capture that profit. Their feedback was there's so much uncertainty when prices come back down in a year. I mean, these are not like you start production tomorrow or next month or even next year. These are 5 to 10 year capital investments that, there's not a long-term prospect for making those big investments. And so they are reaping the benefits. I don't doubt that. Prices are up, they get to sell more of their goods. Um, but the disruption and the lack of certainty is sort of working against the sort of administration's efforts to double down on oil and gas.
Yeah, there's certain oil wells I know that they've drilled, but that they don't actually operate until like it gets over a certain price. So there is a little bit of, and I'm not an oil guy totally, but like there is a little bit of flexibility in the market. Whereas prices go up, it starts becoming more economical to turn those pumps back on and to start to pump that. So there's that. But to your point, is like most of the oil reserves that haven't already been hit are kind of expensive to get to, and so you need to have a certain degree of confidence that prices are going to remain stable and high for a long time before you're going to do that. And historically, that's what used to drive the boom and bust cycles of the oil industry, a famous boom bust industry because of that, because everybody would rush to market and gas is going to be expensive for a while, so let's go drill a bunch. But you have got another thing coming to play right now, and we've talked about it on this show as well, which is that the IEA and other industries are starting to see peak oil, and not peak oil supply, because again, there's reserves that just haven't been tapped, let alone unexplored areas, but peak oil demand. And when you see, the major consumer of oil is cars, and if cars are turning into EVs in Europe and in China, that's just going to be killing oil demand in the longer term. Those never come back. Once somebody buys an EV, they very, very rarely become an internal combustion engine car fan again after that. There are some edge cases there where, somebody has like particularly long commutes or they have to do a lot of towing or something. But the vast majority of people, once they go EV, they don't go back. Um, and China, because they did this right, they have built low cost EVs. I rode around in a BYD in Mexico City, and it was a nice little car. And I think in Mexico City, it costs like $10,000, right? So, which is a lot of money if you're, in the developing world in a lot of cases, but it's a lot less than like anything that we're talking about here. So there's actually this kind of interesting thing where we thought that the developed world would be leading the climate transition, but matter of fact, they are some of the most entrenched interests, and they may actually be lagging in certain places, like in the United States. And we're actually the developing world maybe leading in certain places in the energy transition.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to that point about EVs, I would expand that. I read some analysis, and my new friend Jigger Shaw, who, thanks again, Jigger, for the
Yeah,
shout out last week.
your bro, you and Jigger.
Totally. He made this point too, is like that as the curbing of consumption is done, there's no guarantee that consumption is going to come back. So in a weird way, there's a line of thinking here that if you wanted to accelerate the energy transition to more clean sources of generation, one way you could do it would be to cause an oil shock bigger than any that has happened before, such that the only choice that places like Thailand, Vietnam, Japan have is to curb consumption. And then maybe that consumption never comes back because in the interim, they've found alternative ways to get their energy.
Yeah, almost certainly. Donald Trump, climate president, unintentionally.
He might be more effective than Obama and Biden combined, right?
Yeah, if you destroy oil demand, like that would be the most effective way to make a climate transition. We're only by design, but instead it was just by ego.
Yeah, pretty strange. I don't know. I think there's an element here that we can't look into the future. Maybe that's that last point is true, that that curbed demand doesn't ever come back, but maybe it just snaps back in 6 months and it's all good. The challenge really is that it doesn't look like there's any end in sight here. I mean, I'm a broken record, but the strait now is easily closed. It is hard to keep open. It's easily closed because it could be a couple of guys with a machine gun on the coastline of Iran that are really hard to detect. And if you just tag one tanker that's trying to make the strait run, insurance companies are going to shut down again, and ships are not going to go. And so I think there's a world in which Iran just says, yep, we're going to open the strait, everything's peaceful. And then, the U.S. flexes its muscle again, and Iran can just bring that back out and just say, nope, we're just going to close it again. And I think that gives Iran a lever of power that they just had not exercised before. So I'm not sure this shock ever fully goes away, even if it goes away temporarily.
Yes, strategically, if we had done this 5 years ago, 6 years ago, like we probably could have reopened the strait, right? The world's most powerful navy. There wasn't like the drone technology. We could have figured out a way to probably to reopen the strait. But we didn't. We didn't do that 5 years ago. For good reason, because it was a strategic error. But so we did it now, and we didn't learn the lessons of what was going on in Ukraine. And so, yeah, there are cheap, low-cost weapons that can be launched from a fair amount of distance. Gives you almost the same amount of standoff as if you had cruise missiles, which used to be almost exclusively the U.S. domain. So now Iran effectively has like cruise missile capability in the form of drones that they can use to close down a very constricted waterway. And we were a participant in Ukraine in helping to develop that technology and to arm the Ukrainians and to give them that, that capacity. Obviously, they've done a huge amount of it on their own as well. So I don't want to take anything away from, the bravery and ingenuity of the Ukrainian people. But nonetheless, the U.S. was a behind the scenes participant in Ukraine for all that. We should have learned that lesson, and we didn't. And so now we are stuck. And so and I continue, again, broken record here, our only two options really are a diplomatic solution, which is not going to be on terms that are favorable to the United States, or a more aggressive military solution where we actually start to invade, which are also not on terms that the American people would accept. And so we're stuck in this middle ground where we have bad negotiators that don't understand what the hell they're doing, trying to negotiate top level high stuff without doing the behind the scenes earlier work in order to make it work. They're not bringing in the broader stakeholder set like the Chinese. And so we're going to just continue to watch this happen and I just don't see any other way than those two possibilities associated with it.
So you don't buy the argument that this has become I don't know if it's a talking point. I think there is some good faith actors from the center that are saying, well, look, we had to take a shot. Iran's been a bad actor for 40 years. We couldn't let them get a nuclear weapon. They were weak, divided. People were uprising. This was the moment to take a shot. It didn't work, but at least we took the shot. Do you buy that?
I could almost, if I was being charitable, almost buy it. So the problem with that one is, in my most charitable take, is that it was too late. The uprisings happened. They were violently suppressed. So we didn't get in there and weaken them when they were at their weakest, and when the people were most engaged and saw that they might have a friend outside of it. A lot of the leaders got killed and kidnapped. So that would be my most charitable read of it. I think the more centrist read of it would be that if you really thought that this was going to be the time to take your shot, then you should have done some more things in order to kind of build that up, and you would have been doing like some things a little bit more differently, right? Going after the the Iranian Navy, that doesn't really have a whole lot about like a regime change sort of thing, right? Like that's the Ukrainian Navy is not going to keep the Iranian Navy. Sorry, Ukraine. The Iranian Navy is not going to keep the Ayatollah in power. Like it's the IRGC that does that. And so you would be doing very deliberate, like going after IRGC capacity, strengthening like ground forces, et cetera. But we didn't do that. So my cynical view, and I think is actually the correct view, is that this was within kind of like it was this was done the way that Israel does foreign relations with their neighbors that they have contentious relationships, and they call it mowing the grass, which is like, well, we're just going to go ahead and weaken their military capacity. We know that this isn't a long-term solution, but they hate us anyways, so whatever. And let's just go, destroy some of that capacity. We'll come back and do it again later. And that's what this feels like to me, which is it wasn't very well thought out. It wasn't in the U.S.'s strategic interest. It might have been in Israel's. And, we could have a good faith, argument about like how closely those two align. But in this particular case, it was not in the U.S.'s interest. And so I think we have just done a catastrophically bad thing.
Yeah, I actually think it was in the U.S.'s interest. I just think the execution here was incompetent. If you were to, step back and say, has Iran been a bad actor? Yeah, terrible.
Yeah, no doubt.
On many fronts, the regime is awful to their own people and to the Western world, killed lots of Americans. But if you were going to go do this right, you would build a coalition, will of the American people. You would explain why and what your objectives are. And then you could, I think if you had a chance of toppling the regime and actually creating the conditions on the ground you'd have to acknowledge, stuff that we've talked about on this podcast ad nauseum, which is, like the people on the ground aren't going to rise up against the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, when the IRGC's got all the guns. And so what conditions would you have to create on the ground to enable that uprising? You had this moment in time where Russia was not going to be a factor. Hezbollah and the Muslim Brotherhood and the other proxy forces were all weakened. Iran was in a very weak state from an economic perspective and very unpopular with the population. There was this moment, but then there was a bit of, call it hubris or overconfidence, that we could just go in there with an air campaign and accomplish our objectives, instead of doing what I think we learned from the previous 20 years of war that we were involved in, which was it's an all country effort. It's diplomacy, it's humanitarian, it's many levels of civil society. It is also military and economic. If you brought all of that to the table in a smart way, maybe you'd have a chance. And some of this is hindsight. I don't think we fully appreciated at the time that it wouldn't just work. It had just worked in Venezuela. Maybe it'll work again here too. Maybe there's a genius in that guy in the White House. I don't think any of us for sure knew. I think the experts would have all told you it was doomed to fail. But I understand that there were, as I say, good faith arguments on both sides. I just think in hindsight, we learned the same lesson again, which is like in Iraq, there was no just military victory. That wasn't going to work. We were only going to win, quote unquote, win, if we brought all of the different levers from America: economic, diplomatic, civil society, military, to the table.
Yeah, the U.S. Historically, at least, we've been dismantling it over the last 10 years, but had a lot of levers that it can pull, both in soft and hard power. But I think you're being too charitable here, Neal, because I remember actually when we first did this, like you were a little bit like your initial reaction was correct. Like
Yeah.
you knew this, like this was a fuck up. We fucked up. Like we should have learned something from those last 20 years. And I want to try to find like common cause with, my countrymen and to like find some comedy associated with this. But like, I think even Republicans are like, what the fuck? Like Donald Trump was elected, as being against war. And he just started the biggest, stupidest war that we've, and we've done quite a few stupid wars, especially here.
Well, the biggest, stupidest war in at least 20 years.
Yeah. So, you go back to, what is it, 2003? So go 23 years and we have a contender for a more stupid war. But I'm not sure. But like either way, definitely in my lifetime, my adult lifetime, we knew better than this. It was just stupid. And you knew that too. And so like, I appreciate you trying to, to find comedy and to find.
I'm trying, man. I'm trying.
But this is a pile of shit and we don't have to fucking call it anything other than that.
Oh, it's a pile of shit. All right. Well, our reader mailbag is not a pile of shit. Let's move on to that. So we got thousands of views on this episode, which is pretty good for us. We don't often get that many views. This is just an episode that struck a chord. We got more than 200 comments. We'll just read a couple of them here. And, thank you for the engagement and I learned a bunch from the comments. I'll just read a couple. This is Doug Noble, 1449. As a Canadian, he says, we now view the U.S. as a threat, especially to our sovereignty. And yeah, Doug, I understand why you'd think that. Makes sense to me.
It's a little overstated. We're not amassing forces on the Canadian border here, thank God. But nonetheless, like, we are throwing dirt in the faces of our friends and we're saying that, we're going to take them over. Like, that's not something that you would casually say to a friend, which means that you're not a friend. And not anything Canada's done. It's us.
I get that. But what I relate to here is that Trump is just crazy enough. He's said some crazy stuff that a year ago we thought were impossible. And then he does them. And so could we invade Canada? I mean, holy shit, that would be crazy. But I don't he's done a bunch of stuff that was just completely off the table and unfathomable. And now he's saying he's going to do it. Why wouldn't you take him seriously?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that is totally legit. Maybe I'm overestimating my countrymen, but I do think that this would be the bridge too far. Like people would revolt if we were talking about like a land war on North America.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Mermaid Gray says Trump threatened to annex Canada and began an economic war against Canada within a month of taking office. The silence in defense of Canada was deafening, shameful. This is what I referenced in the opening. I get this. I didn't think I was being silent, but I also wasn't on the streets protesting. So, Mermaid Gray, point taken.
Yep. Totally agree.
All right. Goods, bads, and others. Mike, what do you got?
For me, EVs are on the ascendancy, man. It is a silver lining to quite a dark cloud, and that just makes me happy. As a climate guy, like the fact that EVs are going to be penetrating developing world markets. They're getting into Europe in increasing numbers. China is practically only selling EVs, internally. Like, it's awesome. There's some wraparound, like EVs are not perfectly clean as we would like to pretend they are. There's, some wraparound social components to it. Like don't want to, minimize the mining, but from a climate perspective, this is just good news. And so I'm pretty happy about that. On the flip side of the climate coin, there was some reporting in the Guardian about like how New Orleans is effectively lost, which is that there is no climate future for New Orleans. Like it will go away. And it's kind of worth remembering New Orleans. First of all, if you've ever been there, it's an amazing city. It at one point was the third largest city in the United States. There's Tennessee Williams quote, which is that there are three cities in the United States: San Francisco, New York, and New Orleans. All the rest are Cleveland. As a guy that lives in Denver, I and I think Cleveland's a nice enough town too. So like, I don't want to dog on them, but like New Orleans is, it's a special
My
place.
friends in Cleveland are especially insulted right now, but keep
Yeah,
going.
take it up with Tennessee Williams. Anyway, so but for me, like New Orleans, it's really a special city. They invented jazz. Like
Yeah.
there's a head of all sorts of different types of cuisine. It's just a
Blackened
culture.
catfish.
Oh my god, everything about like New Orleans. It's a neat city. It's got its problems, big problems, but it's a neat city. It was fought over by empires for years because it was the control point for a huge chunk of this
So
continent.
hold on. Let me just make sure I understand what you're saying. You're saying it's going to be underwater soon?
Not necessarily soon, but there is no recovery. The amount of coastal wetland loss that they've had, in large part because of the oil industry kind of fragmenting it, the amount of sea level rise that we're seeing there, like it will just there. It's not a question of if, but when. When New Orleans is lost, and it just won't be recovered the next couple of times.
Well, yeah, there's islands. I've been to one of them, Vanuatu in the South Pacific, that is just predicted to go away. And, it's similar, like timeline, we don't know. But in the next probably like 20 to 30 years, it's going to be so covered with water that most of its landmass is going to be gone. And it'll be definitely gone in 50 years.
Yeah. You could do very similar things about the city of Miami. You can't put levees around Miami and protect it because of the geology of the state of Florida. So
Miami's so swanky. You don't think they're just going to keep building those levees higher?
You can't. It undercuts it because of the I think it's like calcium carbonate is what the rock is there. Then it wears away with seawater. Like you literally can't. So it's an engineering. So without an impossible amount of concrete, you're just out of luck. So I don't think people have really like internalized the fact that like there are American cities and cities elsewhere that we're just going to lose. It's a shame.
And islands, whole countries.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Not to mention the South Pacific and elsewhere. My last one's kind of an other. It's the space program. So I was watching a video that Hank Green, who's a famous, internet influencer kind of guy, and he just like talks at the camera about things that he gets excited about in like this kind of dorky way, but like is endearing. I'm a dork. It's endearing to me. And he was, like you and I know the astronauts on Artemis, right? Like, so there was two former naval aviators, I guess currently naval aviators that are, Reed Wiseman and Vic Glover. So I can't remember who it was, but one of the four astronauts on that crew, one of them Canadian, again, love out to Canada. But one of the four astronauts there took some pictures in kind of like a time lapse of Earth. And it was unlike in the famous photograph from like the Apollo missions where like the Earth was really well lit. In this particular case, it was the dark side of Earth. It was backlit. So you had to really use this high resolution, high simulated ISO in order to be able to get the light of Earth. And so the Earth kind of looked washed out. And there's some, chuckleheads on the internet. They were saying, look at the damage we've done to the Earth. And it's really just photography from a dark angle. But what was really cool about like what Nick or who's Nick? Hank was talking about was in that you could see the satellites going around the Earth. You can actually see them kind of as they were being reflected. They were reflecting sunlight as they were on just this right spot. And it was just like this really animating moment for him. And I got that excitement too of like how alive this place is, and that you can, even from like the distance of, halfway to the moon, you can see life on Earth. You could see the lights of the cities. You could see, thunderstorms and the lightning, that was happening there. You could see the satellites going around it. And so my other is I hope as we continue to do these Artemis missions and then, instead of like the SpaceX and like all of Elon's bullshit, like we actually, kind of like the better version of this is NASA. It's NASA doing these things and putting great Americans like Reed and Vic up into space, and the two other astronauts who we don't know but are I'm sure equally as high caliber as the two that we do. And can we figure out a way to recognize how fucking amazing this place is? And can we start figuring out a way to stop being assholes and start being a little bit more like Vic and like Reed. That's all I got, man.
Yeah, right on. My good this week is a floating platform project that we're working on at Heirloom. We got into this NATO program a while back, and we've gotten some really clear feedback. This could be a really fun episode in the future. Just power in the Arctic. Not something I spent a lot of time thinking about, but the countries that border NATO, all of them the countries that border the Arctic, all of them except for one are in NATO. You can guess which one's not in NATO.
Not all of them used to be in NATO, but then the one that isn't in NATO invaded Ukraine and caused the others to be like, maybe we should be in NATO.
Yes. So, but anyway, the Arctic is a big part of the NATO mission. And the Arctic's getting bigger as the climate changes. The Arctic's getting bigger and therefore more contested because there's more resources being uncovered there. As that happens, more critical infrastructure is being installed. And there's only one way to power all that, and that's basically diesel. The options are like, well, solar is great half the year because, half the year it's pitch black up there. Nuclear would be awesome, but it's too far away. And then you're like, well, we could put wind turbines up there, but the infrastructure doesn't exist to put those gigantic wind turbines up there. And so there's this really interesting use case for Heirloom and for a microgrid technology that could be used there. We're getting a lot of just real genuine interest because there's just few options, and that's generated a bunch of sort of positive momentum for us. So excited about that. My bad this week is that, gosh, dang it. Senator Kelly is being charged again by the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of War. I don't get it, man. It's just bad all the way around. The guy made the statement that is literally a quote from the UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It was a factual statement that you are not required to follow unlawful orders, which every officer in the military knows about, and he's just being targeted.
It's
just
such
bad.
bullshit because I also know the scumbag that's doing the work, and I'm ashamed that he's a graduate of the Naval Academy. And Tim Parlatore, if you're listening, get bent. You're doing a disservice to your constitutional duty, to free speech, to this country. Get bent. You're not doing. This is self-aggrandizement. You're damaging the reputation of a good person who has put his entire life on the line for this country multiple times. His wife took a fucking round to the face, and you're over here using the law to abuse him. Fuck you. Pardon my. Anyways, sorry. That's obviously a hot topic for me.
Yeah, that's why it's my bad. It's just straight up bad. My other this week is the Canada episode. I'm sort of going to try to figure out how best to understand what we learned from that and use it in the future. So appreciate all the input, everybody. And we're going to keep trying to make the show better. And thanks for the input to get us there. So,
yeah. Well, I might say, if I might, Canada, we love you guys. I'll keep standing up for you. Maybe I'll stand up a little bit more as well. So try to keep the faith. There's a few of us around here that appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah, well, a few. There's a lot of it. I think that's the point, is that they're not feeling like there's a lot of us. It is across the board, left, right, and center. I don't know a single person, and I know a lot of conservative people that disagree with me on a lot of stuff. From all sides of the political spectrum, I've gotten nothing but, what the hell are we doing threatening Canada? So I just think, and part of what I learned from that was that we need to be more vocal about it and make sure that we're not just saying it in small places, we're saying it in visible places too.
Here.
All right. Read us out.
Yes, sir. That's it for this episode of Hardpoints. Thanks for listening here in the United States, Canada, and elsewhere, and for being part of the conversation around energy, national security, and the startup economy. If you have a question or a comment about today's show, please send us an email, and we may feature it on a future episode. Our email is hardpoints.show@gmail.com. Again, that's hardpoints.show@gmail.com. Or you can just leave a comment wherever you find us on social media. We do read those. Speaking of which, make sure to follow us wherever you get your podcast, share it on social media yourself, and send it to somebody who might appreciate it and or get angry. Thanks again for joining us. Hardpoints is brought to you by the Valor Media Network. We'll see you next time.